You said that transgenderism doesn't exist. What do you mean by that?
Well, it doesn't exist, again, like going back to what we talked about, when you lift the umbrella, and these are not transgenders, they're drag queens. They're transvestites with fetishes. They're people with autogynephilia. They're people who have mental disorders. That's not transgenderism. Those are behaviors that they've just used a name to identify with their behavior. And they've all taken on the same name identity as transgender, but they all have very different behaviors.
And very different reasons for those behaviors.
Absolutely. So if we were to lift the transgender name off of this and begin to, deal with each individual, we'd have to deal with their sexual indifferences and so forth, right? The guy with autogynephilia who falls in love with himself, or the guy who's sexually aroused, the fetish.
Which are concerns of the mind. They're mental concerns that need to be addressed.
They're psychiatric disorders.
Psychiatric disorders, yes.
Yeah, and so, but nobody wants to own up to the fact that a transgender has a disorder. So it's much easier to camouflage their disorders by using a term that sounds very benign. I mean, if we called them all, oh, you're an autogynephiliac.
Yeah.
You're a person with a transvestic fetish.
You're someone who's been sexually abused.
Yeah, that's quite accurate. But it doesn't play well for the PC crowd.
So it's like the word transgender just protects a whole host of things that we actually are under an obligation to investigate and try and resolve for the sake of the people that are in that category.
If we had compassion, we would actually identify them and identify their disorders and actually help them resolve them. Instead, we put a cone of silence over them and give them a name transgender so that we can't help them.
And that's just the insanity of it, is that the powerful narrative is that the compassionate thing to do is to affirm all of these things with the protection of that word transgender. Whereas what you're doing, and you've seen this firsthand time and again, and it must be terribly frustrating, what you're doing is causing people to simply run down a pathway of usually self-destruction.
Yeah, we're actually creating behaviors that would not have existed except for the fact that we've affirmed them down this pathway. They become obsessed, they become disturbed, they have dissociative disorders, and they're depressed, and that's why they attempt suicide, because nobody's helping resolve the disorders they really have. So can you imagine knowing deep down inside you're struggling with something every day at your home, and you're having all these difficulties, and they're telling you you're fine, you don't have a disorder, but you know you really do, but you can't access therapy that's going to help you resolve it so you can save your life. So the end result is you commit suicide. I attempted suicide.
And that must be also the promise of if you have this done to you, it will solve your problems. And they go through the process, and of course it doesn't solve the problem.
Well, it's poppycock, because you look at the UK Guardian, which is not a favorable group to write about supporting transgender. Well, they do support transgender behavior, but they came out and actually said in a headline, transgender changes are ineffective. In 2004, they had a big study that was done and said people after having reassignment surgery are so stressed to the point of suicide that it's ineffective. And so if we can get together and actually look at the studies that actually show how people are totally distressed after going through this reassignment surgery, and hormones are a powerful drug that cause people to think, feel, and behave very differently, and actually begin to help them, wouldn't we be better off? And we would be resolving many of these suicide issues and depressions and other things that people have in an appropriate psychotherapy way, instead of just feeding them hormones and cutting body parts off.
So if we want to love people who are experiencing gender dysphoria, or who may be manifesting behaviours which fit under the transgender banner, one thing we will not do is perpetuate the lie that transgenderism is a thing, or perpetuate the lie that affirming the behaviours or facilitating transition is going to help them.
Right. And the only people that can speak to this appropriately are the people who come out the other side, who have regret and begin the detransition process. And they reach out to me and said, I want to know what really was going on with me. And then they began, as I said earlier, 100% of them can actually articulate what happened to them. And now they want to deal with it later in life. And then they engage in psychotherapy where they couldn't do it before, or they were discouraged from going into psychotherapy to sort of uncover what the disorder was. We find that the people had very difficult childhood in many cases and had horrible things happen to them that really requires good, sound, effective psychotherapy. It's proper to do.